me something, Uncle Money?
Welcome for another episode of Building Wealth and Mental Health. We have a special guest. She actually works with therapists. So I think she's going to tell you a lot of things specifically about pricing, how to make sure you get the most value out of your company and the business that you're building. So I think the information Tiffany McLain is going to provide is going to be something we can all take home, even if you're not in the mental health space. If you're just a business owner, she's going to provide you things to think about pricing and how you should get the most value out of your services. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about yourself and about who you serve.
Yes, my name is Tiffany McLain. As you said, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist by trade, but I have actually built out a business. It's called Lean In, Make Bank. And there we serve, actually myself, the whole team, we're obsessed with helping therapists build wealth while continuing to increase their capacity for joy, freedom, service, continuing to serve the people that they're passionate about serving. That is what we do.
I like that. And it's interesting. We're going to get into your transition, but when did you first think about becoming a mental health professional? What drove you to that field?
Interesting. So I've always been pulled to help people in some capacity. I wonder how much that's influenced by being a woman, a person of color. You know, we're pushed in all kind of ways by society to be serving others, caretakers, etc. So even as young as high school, I remembered with our church, I served as a camp counselor for children with foster children, actually. So even then I was pulled to work with folks who seemed to come from struggling backgrounds, traumatized backgrounds. I then went from there, went to grad school, studied psychology, but not even with the plan to go on and become a therapist. I don't even know how much I knew that was an option. It was just a degree I took. I went and dabbled around with actively serving in a restaurant. You know how that is. And eventually my brother said to me, he said, Tiffany, my older brother, what are you doing? Stop messing around. You need to go to grad school. And it clicked. I'm like, all right, yeah, what am I doing? That's actually on some level what I've always wanted to do. And so I went to grad school. I think I was in my late 20s by the time I applied and went that route.
How did you decide which grad school? I know that's a tough decision a lot of people have to face. It has significant financial ramifications and, whether a school specializes in this and that. So how did you make your decision which master's program you decided to go to?
Yeah, I moved to San Francisco. That's where my brother was living. So I wanted to be close to family. I loved the city. So I knew, okay, I have to be going to grad school in San Francisco because that's where I've come to live. I love it. And then my next consideration, I knew, even though I didn't know how complicated this was at the time, I knew that I wanted to go into private practice on the other side. I thought if I can be in business for myself and I can be helping people, there's no limit to my financial capacity, my financial potential. So I even had a thought of like, what am I really going to learn in grad school? I don't know why I had this thought. I just need the license. So I was like, where can I go to grad school that's affordable? I want to be able to pay for it. And that was my number one. It just so happened, so I went to San Francisco State. It just so happened they had a really good clinical psychology program. They took about 8 to 10 people, and they focused on psychodynamic psychotherapy. So a lot of school modalities are moving to more behavioral models, step one, step two, step three. This program really emphasized that they wanted to understand the unconscious patterns, deeper psychology, the impact of intergenerational trauma, those types of ideas. So I was also, it just so happened, lucky that the school that was affordable also was the one that actually took psychology, human psychology, more seriously and understood that it was complex and nuanced and not just a behavioral 1, 2, 3. So that made my choice easy.
So every therapist has to make a decision. Do I want to work with kids? Do I work with adults? What made the decision for you?
Interesting. I actually initially thought maybe I would work with kids. I love kids. I'm drawn to working with kids. I even worked in an agency in preparation for grad school. And in grad school, as my internship, I also worked with kids. And I actually quickly learned that I did not want to work with kids, not because I didn't love the work with kids, but because it's devastating to work with children who are so helpless and they're at the mercy of the family structure that they're in. And really, I don't believe that one can work with a kid without working with the entire family. And often by the time when families bring kids into therapy, they just want the therapist to fix the kid. And they have resistance to looking at the larger family dynamic that's leading to the struggle the kid is exhibiting. So for that reason, I realized I got to work with adults. I did dabble in doing couples work, but ultimately I honed in on working with individual adults who could afford the fee, although that was a little bit of a journey.
Any aha moments about working with couples? This generation it seems like it's more of a challenge every day for people to come together. What did you see with your brief stint working with couples that was like, that's why it's so tough?
Well, interesting. I actually love couples work. It's fun. It's intense. You're dealing with multiple psyches. Interesting question. So I haven't worked, it's been about 7 years since I've done individual work or even worked with couples, probably a little bit longer. So I would say even some of the dynamics that are coming up now around the ways technology has impacted people's ability to connect with one another, be vulnerable with one another, that's come after my work with couples. So those kinds of things were not really, those kind of patterns weren't showing up yet. When I was working with couples, a lot of them were older millennials. So they had a time in their life where technology wasn't present. So actually had a chance to socialize in ways that a lot of young couples have not.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So, and a lot of therapists I know have troubles with this transition. You spent so many years gaining a degree, becoming licensed, but now you wanted to make a slight career shift. What was that process like? What was going on internally at that time?
Interesting. I knew, so like I said, I knew that I wanted to go into private practice. As I was getting my clinical hours to become licensed, I actually chose to do a post-grad program. So I had 2 years of grad school. I wanted more training and more intensive training into this unconscious process of working with people. And so I actually did a 2-year post-grad program that was basically like grad school all over again, but with even more depth. It was actually a doctoral program, but they took a couple of master's level clinicians in there. So I wanted to continue my training. So I did that. But even as I was doing that, because I knew I wanted to start my own business ultimately, I started looking into the business world. And I came upon this online business world. And for me, that opened up many possibilities about income potential, even beyond doing one-to-one work. So I was exploring what it would look like to have an online business, maybe some kind of course or program, at the same time that I was beginning my one-to-one private practice journey. So they kind of came together, or they kind of emerged at the same time.
Gotcha. So when you were in your master's program, or even before you went into your master's programs, what did you think about the income you would make? Did somebody advise you to say, hey, this is what we're going to make here. This is the top end, the low end. These are the populations that pay versus not pay. What did you think about lifestyle once you became a practicing therapist?
That's interesting. When I applied to San Francisco State, and it was the only school I applied to, I remember even in the interview process, and it was very competitive because they had only a few spots. Even though I knew I wanted to go into private practice ultimately, I somehow had the inclination that I shouldn't say that. I had to go in and say, I just want to serve, social justice, work in nonprofit. Like even then, and I don't know how, I felt a taboo around saying, I really want to go into private practice and help individuals in that capacity. Like it wasn't allowed. And it felt like throughout grad school, it continued to be, the messages were, don't expect to make money in this field. We're not here to make money. We're here to help people. So subtly throughout the whole thing was a message of, you're never going to make money. You're here to serve. And those messages, some part of me was like, nope, that's not my path. But literally all the people, seasoned professionals I looked up to, that was the message. So it was two parts of me, the part that kind of went through holding that message in mind, and the part of me that said, I have to find a different way to do things, because I'm not going to be someone who's doing all this work to be broke on the other end of it. That's not how I want to live.
It makes sense. So how do you think about that? So they charge grad students a lot of money. On the other hand, they say you should do this to serve. Is that healthy that they do that? Like, is that realistic? Like, are there people secretly making a lot of money and others aren't? Right. that keeps, so what do you think about that whole process on how they teach just the service and not the, sustaining a lifestyle?
Well, I'm going to say something that's maybe a little controversial. That's how I do.
Sure.
The folks who teach tend to be the folks who are not making a lot of money. The folks who teach are the ones who come back and teach. Teaching doesn't pay well in most grad programs. So often professors are people who love to teach, but also they need to keep dual incomes going. So often they'll have a small private practice where they haven't really studied the business part. They're likely not making much money over there, and they're kind of keeping that up. And then they're over here working their behinds off as professors, also not making very much. So those are the people who are having the biggest income impact on students going through the program. So then those students are seeing their professors struggling and feeling resentful about their economic situation. And so those professors are continuing the message around poverty, scarcity, you're going to be working real hard, you're not going to be making a lot of money. So that's what students get inundated with. And then they go off with that assumption, many of them, and then continue to replicate those patterns by doing agency work, where they're continuing to not make money, being, just work to the bone. And so then they're going back and repeating those stories to the next level of students or therapists coming up.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's like going to certain agencies is really taxing on some of the things that you see day in and day out, like the really most traumatized things that human life goes through, you have to see and take in. And then to go home and not have enough to live in a nice apartment, take your kid to the nicest school, that's tough. It's suffering on top of suffering. Right. And that's part of the reason of this right here is to show there are other options. So you are, you were studying how to come in private practice. You were also learning, about private coursework, how to get your message out and sell. What happened next while you were learning these two things?
I can say that in my post-grad program, where we were learning about depth psychology, one of the rules, or I don't know, with I can't think of the word, but the plans they had in place at that place was every 6 months, they wanted the therapists to address fees with our clients. The clinic we worked at, so it was a grad program that had a lot of training, and you also worked with your clients. They had a sliding fee scale structure that went all the way down to $30 and maybe up to $120. And they wanted you to be paying attention to your clients and making sure they were staying where they were supposed to be on that scale. So if your client comes in paying 30, but then they get a raise or they get a significant life situation and they get more, they want you to be addressing that. So even here in this program, where that was their protocol, nobody was doing it. None of the clinicians were ever addressing money. And I was paying attention to that because I knew ultimately I want to go have a private practice. I'm going to have to know how to talk about money, even though I was terrified of it as well. And I saw how even in this grad program where that was the protocol, the supervisors, the people running the program couldn't get the grad students to do it. So I made it my focus in that 2 years. I said, I'm going to be the person who every 6 months brings up money because I need to learn how to tackle this. My supervisors were kind of helpful, but even they didn't have a lot of training in how to think about it in a rich, complex way, along with the real business of reality, the reality of the business portion. And even that institutions struggled because they needed to have enough income coming in to pay for all of the things that they were doing, but they couldn't address the money even enough to make sure their business was working well. And so I knew even then I have to figure this out. And when I went into thinking about, okay, I want an online business, I want to learn how to do this online marketing thing, my initial thought was maybe I'll start working with therapists around business because that's what I was studying. Oh, let me learn it and teach it. But even more than that, the one thing that nobody was talking about, nobody was able to help with, was this thing around fees. And literally every therapist I talked to at every phase of their professional life, I think there was one therapist, an analyst, who had figured it out. Her fees were phenomenal. She spoke openly about it. Everyone else was struggling, silent, uncomfortable. And so I thought, okay, this is the place I have to go because it's uncomfortable and it needs to be addressed if this field is going to be successful ultimately.
I know you've thought a lot about fees. Why do people struggle raising their fees, really asking for their fair compensation? And even outside of the therapist space, when you think about salary compensation, salary negotiations, asking your boss for a raise is all automatically contentious. So like, why do we struggle so much of asking for what we're worth?
I'll say, I'm going to break this up into a couple of parts. First thing that I'll say is even your language right there. It's people talk about this all the time, and I think there is a misconception or a problem built into how we talk about it. You said, why do folks struggle with charging or asking for what they're worth? And it's the moment we start conflating our worth with what the value we're adding to the world or the type of money we're trying to bring in, things get all mixed up because many people feel like they lack worth. Maybe they're insecure personally. Some days they're on top of the world. Other days they're feeling down. So if we're thinking about, I'm going to go in and ask for the salary based on what I'm worth, that is a non-starter for most people from the beginning. So I really try to help therapists, and this could work for people who are working in a corporate world, any profession, salary, to start by thinking, what's the value of what I'm creating or what I'm offering when talking about going in for a raise or raising their fees. For therapists, we actually, because you get to charge whatever you want, unlike working for a company where your salary depends on what they're going to give you, as a therapist, you can charge whatever you want, right? So we encourage therapists to start by thinking about, what are my financial needs and desires? Set that fee and then figure out how to create value that make people beg to come see you, even if your fees are higher than average. Now, going back to what makes it so difficult for therapists, it's a triple fold. Three contributing factors, particularly for women and people of color, who I specialize in working with, or folks who come from working class backgrounds. Number one, therapists are often the person in their family who served as the caregiver or the mediator. So from the get-go, they were the person in their family who was attuned to the feelings of others. Probably came in to make sure their parents were okay, put their needs aside to make sure everyone else was okay. That's been a pattern. There was a study by a woman named Ella Lasky, and she found that that's the role most therapists played in their family of origin. Number two, if you're a person of color or a woman, you've grown up in a society that says your actual value is less. So coming back to what am I worth? They say your worth is tied to you serving others and neglecting yourself. We can go back as people of color, Black folks, slavery. Our value was in being enslaved and serving others, right? So that's a very clear through line. Same for women, very clear through line. So societal structures are set up to say your value comes from serving others and putting yourself second. So you get it in your family of origin, then you get it from the wider society. And then if you're a therapist or a social worker, you go into a profession where that message is amplified and reinforced by all the people who grew up that way, don't question it. And then we police each other and start shaming and judging any therapist who says, I want to also make money, or I also want to take care of myself. We talk about self-care, but if you actually say, I want financial self-care, I want financial ease and abundance, and I'm going to set my rates in order to achieve that. The second you do that, you get in trouble from the wider profession. So 3 places: family of origin, wider society, and then profession. All of it says, keep your fees low, serve others, neglect yourself. We're here to help people, not make money. So of course, by the time a therapist is in private practice and wanting to set fees, everything is working against them, setting a fee that's actually in line with their own financial well-being.
That makes sense. And I feel like also what's capping fees, you let me know if I'm wrong, is the concept of insurance. So when you file for insurance, they're going to charge you a certain rate. So people are telling you this is what we're willing to pay. And that starts as, we call in finance anchoring. You anchor to that dollar amount versus really thinking about, like you mentioned, the value that I'm providing. And I think it hurts actually the service being provided because it stops you from focusing on the value and more about the volume. And I think that stops. So what do you think about I guess, how insurance has played a role in keeping prices down for therapists?
I love this concept you're bringing up of anchoring. I have not actually thought about this in that way, that if insurance companies are saying we'll reimburse you $60 or $80 if you're lucky per session, then a client might, and the client is paying $20 of that of a copay. If they're then going to go to an out-of-pocket therapist or a therapist who's saying my fee is $200, that's sticker shock because they've anchored, I love that, to this idea that therapy should be $60 to $80. Wow. I'm curious. I don't quite know what things were like in the 50s when therapy was male dominated, white male dominated. I don't know how insurance played a role, but I know those therapists were making a lot of money. And there's even an idea today that therapists and psychologists are just rolling in dough. There was a movie, a show, I think it was on HBO recently, about this therapist who got kidnapped by his client. Did you see that show?
I see it now.
Very good. It was an excellent thriller. And they showed that therapist in his home, and it was this glorious, huge home in like this, urban part of town. And I was like, I don't know any therapist who's making that kind of money these days. And so first thing I can say is people paid a high price for therapy. It was highly valued in the 50s when it was white male dominated. Now, as there are a lot more women in the field and a lot more people of color, of course, as it happens, it starts being devalued. Insurance wants to cut corners everywhere they can. So if a therapist goes the insurance route, and many of them are told that's how you should go, or if you want to build your practice quickly or start a practice, you need to start with insurance, then of course they have a very hard time. The therapist has a very hard time imagining any other way for things to be. And they also work with a clientele who expects to pay $20 for a licensed professional who had 2 to 7 years of education plus licensing, 3,000 hours of licensure after that. They expect to pay $20 for that service. And if a therapist is providing that service for that, $20 copay and maybe a $60 payment from the insurance, they're devaluing their service and devaluing the entire profession.
So the question always is a new therapist coming out of school, wanting to go into private practice. How do I find people who want to pay $200 per session, $400 per session? Like, where are these folks and do they actually exist? Because in their mind, they've only been serving in agencies and nonprofits. So it's outside their box of understanding. So where are these people?
I'll say a couple of things about this. It's impossible to find something that you don't believe exists, number one. Number two, many therapists are upwardly mobile. So they come from working class backgrounds or middle class backgrounds where they could never imagine paying $200 or $400 for therapy. So they're surrounded by, most likely, people who also could never imagine paying $200 or $400 for therapy. So their entire world, they have a cognitive bias towards nobody's going to pay that, and everything in their environment confirms that belief. So it's really hard for them to believe otherwise. In our program, when we work with therapists, we actually have to start by doing the internal work first before they can even begin to imagine or look over here and see, oh, there's an entirely other world over here. That's the first piece of this. There's 3 parts. The second part is therapists, I think a lot of people too, from working class backgrounds who have only ever made a certain income, we have all kinds of internal beliefs about what it means to have wealth, negative judgments. If you come from a Christian background, blessed are the meek, right? The rich man, easier for him to go through the eye of a camel to, the verse, easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for that rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So we're conflicted about both serving wealthy people, what kind of people those are. I want to help people who don't have money. Why would I help somebody who already has money on the one hand? On the other hand, there's also insecurity. Am I good enough to serve this person? What are they going to think of me? What if they see my 2015 Honda parked out on the lot? So it's both a denigration of the wealth and an envy and desire for. So all those feelings, if you haven't done your work, are going to come out the moment you're sitting across from someone who can pay you $200 per session. Finally, in reality, so if you get through all those things and you're ready to actually go charge $200 or $400 per session, many people who work for corporations, unlike therapists and nonprofits, for example, they have a PPO insurance. That means their insurance is paying 50 to 80% of their payment. Those people are not actually paying $200. I actually pay for my personal therapy twice a week. I go to an analyst. Her fee is $325 per session. I pay out of pocket that money, but I have access to PPO insurance. So maybe after the first month or two, I might be paying $80 per session. After October, because I go so often, I'm paying $25 per session. So these folks who are saying I have to serve on insurance, no one can afford 200 or 400. The reality is many people who have corporate jobs have access to resources, and they can use that. They can be paying 50 or 150, and that therapist is getting 350 or 400 per session.
Yeah, that's what I've been learning through this work, is that it's understanding the market itself. So in your case, can you build a relationship with the company so you can be like an endorsed provider or part of a PPO plan? Are you part of a school system where they need to do certain amount of assessments, who can afford it, who need somebody who understands their clientele and can work with them and be flexible? But I think it takes a level of creativity and to be in the know. What I've observed is you kind of need to know the right people to be in the right places. Can you speak on, let's talk about somebody who's just got their graduate or doctoral program. Like, how do you meet the right people to tell you the right things to make the most money? Because it is kind of like a whisper, rumor mill industry that you work in.
Or they can come to us and we'll be a yelling. We don't like to keep any secrets. We want women and people of color to have the secrets that other folks have had for generations. So we're not whispering over here. And to your point, the very first module, so when we're working with our therapist, the very first whole module is all about building a community of people who are going to encourage and challenge you to play bigger. The thing with therapists is that many therapists, of course, come from trauma. That's why they want to go in and help other people. So they have all kinds of relational issues and attachment issues that if they remain unaddressed, they're not actually going to go out and be able to mingle, get to know, find mentors who are encouraging them to live a different way. If you see a therapist charging $600 per hour and you feel envious and spiteful and frustrated and have judgments about how that person's greedy, you can't then go and learn from that person. So you actually have to start by paying attention to your own thoughts and feelings, getting support with getting reframes and support around how you relate to people who have experienced success. Once you do that, you can actually then start going out. And it's pretty simple once you do that to start finding people who've actually done it and follow in their footsteps, or set up a consultation. Even if someone charges $200 per session and you want to know how they did it, invest $200 for 1 hour of their time to pick their brain. Start by paying to play. And if you're like, $200 is a lot, look, man, look, folks, if that's where you want to go, you need to start by seeing what it feels like to pay that money to learn from somebody who has done all that work to get to that point.
I think that's interesting. So we think about a therapist and our, relationships. We think about a therapist to handle our emotions, but rarely do we think about a therapist to handle our economic situation, building wealth, and our vocation, what we do for a living. And we do need help in that space. Like, how did you realize that that's a problem for folks?
I had it, right? The student becomes the master. I struggled with all those things. I struggled with, with my caseload. I had at San Francisco State, they start you out with your first clients or patients within 2 or 3 weeks of starting the program. I had folks who I started with at that program with people who were charging $10. We were charging them maybe $5 or $10 an hour, and then kept those people with me. They were able to come with me through various stages. I might have worked with some people 8 to 10 years who went from paying $10 per session to maybe $150 per session. But that required me to grow. Initially, I thought if this person pays me $30 and I need to actually realize I need $150 to live, what's going to happen to this person? I had all kinds of conflicts, all kinds of discomfort, and I didn't really have people to go to and talk about it. Seasoned clinicians, supervisors, consultants, they couldn't really talk to me about it in a nuanced way. So for me personally, I knew I had to solve this problem. I was not here to play around. I was in my 30s living in San Francisco. I couldn't be like, let me just charge $25 for the next 20 years. I didn't have time. I was too old. So I had to figure out how to solve it. And I knew in solving it, I would then be able to go back and serve as a mentor to folks in a way that I did not have.
What about people who have this sticking point? They say, hey, I want to serve the less fortunate. Those who have less means, who can't naturally afford it. But like you said, I want to live indoors, eat good food. Like, how do you balance that thought process that a therapist may have?
I had my first inclination. I won't say. I was initially going to say you can't have it both ways, but that's not exactly true. It's an order of operations question. We hear this all the time. The Virgin America airline song: "You got to put your mask on first before you offer assistance." I think it's absolutely possible to be someone who sets oneself up for financial success and ease and takes care of others, but not at the same time. There are folks who can do it at the same time, and I'm seeing this more and more to my surprise. It looks like they're just doing it all, working for an agency, have a nice house. Those folks got money either from a spouse or a family, and those are the things we don't talk about. I have been surprised to talk to friends recently, and I find out, oh, their parents give them tens of thousands of dollars a year. This is a world I'm like, what? So I've been comparing myself all the time to people who have generational wealth, whether that's $10,000 or maybe they have $200,000 given to them on a one-off. So first of all, a therapist, person with a salary asking for a raise, whoever it is, we can't compare ourselves to the people we see because we literally have no idea what's happening in their financial world. If you want to be someone who can take care of oneself, have a nice house, live a life of ease and joy, and serve, I would say make sure you're able to set yourself up, you're safe, your retirement's taken care of, your student loans are taken care of. And if you really want to serve, then that will motivate you to hurry up and get yourself set up so then you can make some space. That's number one. Number two, a therapist does not have to give back by virtue of their practice. So many therapists say we have to offer a sliding scale because we have to give back. I love it, but do not give, it's not a requirement to give back with your livelihood, right? Have a livelihood, have a profession that you're making good money for because you worked hard for it, and then go volunteer if that's what you want to do. Put aside your time over here, maybe invest in a charity, whatever that looks like for you, but it doesn't have to be taken out of your livelihood.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a balance. You can't have it all at once. I think those are valid points. And it could be, like you said, the socialization, going to grad school, and even if you go to your doctor program of you're not supposed to make money, that probably weans into their head along with let's say upbringing. And I think you brought a valid point. People who have masters and doctorate, a lot of times their parents had masters and doctorate. So like I say, you're comparing yourself to somebody else. That's not fair. And yeah, marrying rich helps in a lot of different ways. So what do you think is next for you? Like what type of programs do you see yourself wanting to roll out? And please provide, the programs, a little bit more details of the programs you provide today.
Sure. So our baseline program, the one we've been running for maybe, I don't know if it's 7 years, something like that. It's called the Lean In Make Bank Academy. It is a controversial name for therapists because they're like, make bank? Oh, heaven forbid. But they don't hear the lean in part. And the lean in part is about leaning into the unconscious process, the dynamics that come with raising fees. So we actually, in our program, we've had over 750 students go through that program. We don't teach, send a letter, raise your fees, keep it moving. We actually teach how to be present with your client and make fee raising a clinical intervention. So if you have a client, let me think of an example, who's paying you $100 per session and has for the past 5 years, and you realize you actually need to be charging $200. Often therapists have clients who are on a sliding scale who come in with a really nice bag or a really nice purse or out there driving a Tesla or going on nice vacations. Meanwhile, the therapist is like drinking Trader Joe's wine and suffering, and they're resentful and envious of that client. That's the therapist's problem. That's not the client's problem. So the therapist needs to get clearer boundaries, understand the unconscious dynamics, understand the ways they may be playing out codependent interactions with their clients. So actually saying to a client who says, I don't know if I can pay $200 per session, saying something like, well, I do notice, again, we're not going to recommend this, it depends on the situation, but if it's clinically relevant to say, I hear you saying that. I also know that you pay $500 a month for your child's horse riding lessons. Let's think about where we're putting our value, right? But that can't happen until the therapist has done their own work, their own internal unconscious work around their relationship to money, their relationship to boundaries, and their relationship to their clients. So that's what we do in the Lean In Make Bank Academy. We've recently rolled out a next level program for graduates of that. That program is called SWAN, which is about strategic wealth and accountability for premium fee therapists. So it's a network of premium fee therapists. And we're really helping those therapists continue to refine their relationship to their businesses, marketing, building wealth, and figuring out what they want to do next in terms of scaling their business. So that's a program we're just playing with, rolling out, really fun, much more flexible than the initial program. But folks have to go through our program LIM so they can really understand a mindset, have a different way of thinking, and then we may welcome them into our next level.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had to go through that as well. It's, I would see clients spend $2,000 on eating out, and I compare that to my fee, and I'm like, well, there's something off.
Yes.
And I have two questions. One of the questions is, what do you think about clients who, let's say, push back? Let's say they pay $100 for a therapy session, and you think it's fair and they can afford $200, and they say, no, that's not happening. What do you think about that client as far as, I don't know how to say this, how effective the therapy sessions are for them because they're quote unquote not valuing? Is that a thing?
I'm going to think about how to go into this the most thoughtfully. People do value what they pay for. We know that. Therapists also, you can either rise to the level of your fee or you can lower yourself to the level of your fee, depending on, and it's not about the concrete number, like $100 per session might be fabulous for somebody. Whereas $200 per session for somebody might be barely making it by for that therapist, client too. So we have to, again, taking stock of someone's real economic situation. But something, a particular dynamic, for example, that may come up is you might have a female client who's married to a rich husband, let's say. Maybe she came from poverty. She's married to a rich husband now, all kind of gender stereotypes, making stuff up. She might come into the session and be like, I can only pay $50 per session, because that's her internal world. That's her, that's where she's cognitively set financially. She might be working with another woman therapist who's also like, yeah, $50. And in some way they're colluding around poverty, being a victim, being vulnerable. And also those are real dynamics that may be playing out in this power relationship with the husband. However, if that therapist goes through Lean In Make Bank and is like, wait a minute, I actually need to take care of myself. I'm a single mom. I have a kid. I can't be earning $50 per session. She goes in and says, my fee is now $200. That female client might feel betrayed, hurt, misunderstood. You don't understand the power dynamic here. If I go to my husband and I have to ask for more money. Those are really interesting clinical dynamics to get into. That spouse, that wife client could really grow if she actually faced those dynamics. By colluding at the $50, we're often actually keeping ourselves small and we're keeping our clients small. Versus if that therapist says, look, I know that you can pay $200 per session. It's got to, again, she wouldn't say it in this way. It depends on the dynamic, but can hold, this woman has some things to work out with her spouse. Money is a big part. We're going to really look at that together at $200 per session. We're going to really start going into the difficult parts of your internal world and what's happening in your marriage. We're not going to play it out here too. We're going to really show up, do this work together, and it's going to require you to do tough things in this marriage. That might even mean this marriage is not going to work. We don't know, but we're not going to keep our $50 collusion session, victim stance, helplessness. We're going to actually step into our power and figure out what that means. That's what a therapist owning their fee allows them to actually do better clinical work with their clients.
It almost implies that sometimes your client can't grow until you grow at some level.
Not even almost, Avery, that's exactly right. Therapists, if they're keeping their fees low, are often limiting the growth of their own clients, not financially, but psychically. Yeah,
that's big.
Right.
That's humongous. I like that. So now let's talk about scaling. This is another problem. If you decide to be a business owner and you want to expand the company beyond what you can individually service, you can bring on a therapist, but that has its own set problems. You have to set up fee splits. You have to set up, maybe a standard of care, all those things. Speak about some of the problems people have scaling to that level.
This is interesting. It's tough. Actually, this is why I didn't continue doing one-to-one work. Again, being a late bloomer in life financially, living in an extremely expensive city, even if I charge 500, even if I charged 1,000 per session, that would get me nowhere near the basic standard of life. Here's a reality. We have 2 kids. Our youngest son is just going to kindergarten. We're having him go to private school because the public schools are not great around here. Actually, some of them are great, but we wanted something different for him. The public school average, just the standard public school is $43,000 a year. 43,000. We make good money. I mean, compared to where I grew up, we make good money. Even with that, we got almost half off. So we're poor people in this city that we live in, which just goes to show, like, even if I'm charging 1,000 per session, I can't make enough unless I want to be working a ton. I don't want to be working. I don't want to be trading dollars per hour. So I had to make a choice around, how do I actually serve people and make money financially? And it can't be one-to-one. That being said, if a therapist is in many cities, most cities in the US, and you're charging $300 per session, you could see 12 people and be just doing phenomenally. You probably don't need to scale. You don't need to grow your practice. You don't need to bring people under. You could probably just be okay, right? The problem is many therapists charge $60 or $80 per session, even $100 per session, and you literally can't see enough people and do enough quality of care to actually take care of themselves. If they do want to do something beyond one therapy, maybe they're going to see 10 people for $300 or $200 and they want to grow. Well, first of all, that's where you come in, because you're going to be able to help them with that. Secondly, one of the things charging premium fees does is it allows you to keep your caseload small so you can really do good work for the people you're working with, but also leaves you enough time and creative energy to pursue other streams of income.
I think that's important. You have to pause and be creative, I believe, in your business, or even if you're working a job or career, there has to be time where you sit back and say, can I do this better? Are there other things that I can do? What other ambitions inside of me? But if you're worked to the bone, all you can do is go home and watch TV and Netflix.
Be right. Exactly right.
Spot on. So for you, either it's through your life experiences or seeing other therapists, do you have any financial tips that you've picked up along the years to say, hey, therapists need to think about this, or I've done this and I think can work for other people?
That's great. Well, I was going to ask you that same question because but let me share what I've learned. I'm still getting my footing under me financially, still learning. But the thing that I wish I had known when I was my children's age was obviously about compound interest. If you start young and put in 100 or 200 or 300 per month into just regular S&P 500 or index funds, by the time you're retired, you're set. Even probably by the time you're 50, you're just set. So I think a lot of folks my age or your age, we didn't learn those lessons. So we're just playing catch up with lessons that folks who were more fortunate or had, generational wealth, they understand those lessons right away. So probably the biggest shift for me has been learning to shift away from what they say is trading time for money, and actually building enough wealth or enough little nest egg that you can start having that money make money over here. But that takes a lot of, to your point, time, creativity, relationships, finding the people who know how to do it, and then just slowly eking out enough money to put over there, and then enough knowledge and resources, relationally or otherwise, to know what to do with that money. That's what I'm working on now and thinking a lot about these days.
That's important. I always say that, financial literacy is first taught at the dinner table. So what you receive from your parents, your community, what's around you. And then if you don't receive that as a child, you have to make up that time as an adult, along with other behavioral tendencies you probably developed over the years. So I think that's awesome. So what is next for you? So you mentioned you adding the second program. Is there anything else you're thinking about doing?
Oh, so we have a podcast. It's called The Money Sessions. I started it years ago when I was pregnant with my first kid, and I thought, okay, I need some content coming out while I'm on maternity leave. So let me just knock out these podcasts. That was actually very helpful for me because I didn't have pressure. I wasn't trying to make a podcast. I was just going to make some content while I was gone. It ended up doing really well. We have maybe 70 episodes. People love it. Therapists love it. We have very honest, very real, very transparent conversations about moving from agencies, moving from insurance panels to cash pay premium fee practices. That's all that we talk about. We have put it on hiatus for the past 2 years. I, as a business owner, have been spending an extraordinary amount of money, but also talk about therapy twice a week, resources to try to understand how to build a team with an amazing culture and attract A players. We have cracked the code on that, Avery. It took about 5 years, but we got it. So now that we have this team that's just phenomenal, we're going to restart that podcast again and then eventually turn it into a YouTube channel. So we're getting back out the money sessions, and I'm really excited about that because it will give us the opportunity to continue to reach more therapists, even who can't afford our program. We have some people who say, I listened to those episodes, all 70, and I was able to raise my fees, right? So we have a huge impact with this podcast. I'm excited to get that back out.
Love that. So if somebody's in the situation, I'm working too hard, I'm not charging enough, I don't know how to even start the fee conversation, like how can they reach out to you? Like, what is the best way to get connected with you?
I'll start with, we have a free tool. It's our Fun with Fee calculator. I'll give you the link for that. I love starting there because we actually, we have a little companion video, but we help therapists actually start by saying, daring them to dream big. Like, first of all, what do you need to live? Like, let's go look at our finances. And therapists might not even want to look at their finances. So we say, get a friend. If you're married or have a partner, get with your partner and just look over the reality of your monthly expenses. Then we have our next section is our dream section. What do you want to do? If you could really live, you could do violin lessons or travel once a year or take 6 weeks vacation. Like, put your dream over there and really push people to dream. And then we actually just have a calculation where they just put in how many people do they want to see in their dream life? How many days do they want to be working a week? And then the calculator spits out the fee they would need to charge in order to have that dream life. And so even starting with like, here's the reality of how possible it is. You might get a number that's like, I could do that. Some therapists get a number that's like, how could I ever make it? But regardless of what comes up, we encourage you to see the reality of their number and then make space for the feelings, because you're going to have feelings one way or another. And that's, for us, the best way to start. Get that calculator and get real about what it would look like for you to actually go after what you really want when you went into private practice. Listen, Avery, nobody goes into private practice saying, I just want to be broke. If you want to simply serve, you can do that in an agency. There are so many agencies where you're paid a salary, you get health benefits, you can just stay forever. But a therapist who goes in private practice, even if they're conflicted, they're going into private practice because they want freedom, they want time, they want to do something their own way, they want to be their own boss. So they go into it, but then 90% of their mind is still stuck in this old way. But the 10% of their mind, I just got goosebumps because 10% of their mind wants something more for themselves and believes in themselves. And we really want to help that therapist, that 10% who has bigger dreams and wanted something for their lives. We want to help grow that part and strengthen that part of a therapist's mind and body.
I like that. I think that's important. I think that's important for all industries, but specifically therapists. I think they crucially need those conversations. I like that you have a tool that anybody can use and it kind of primes them for the next steps. So thank you very much. I think this episode was amazing. I think you did an amazing job explaining the benefits of really focusing on your fees. So thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
The more I know, the more money I can make.